As we creep closer and closer to the end of Game of Thrones, one question is looming on everyone's minds, and that is, how will it all end? How will the culmination of 10 years of the greatest show on earth end? We know it's not going to suck, we know it's going to be out of the friggin' pack, but we just don't know what to expect. In this video, I'm going to discuss several different ways Game of Thrones may end. Next week is the battle for Winterfell, and it is guaranteed to be filled with death, but we still have 3 more episodes remaining. Now, as always, here's your sign, and let's begin. Now before we get started, please slap a like on this video as the like goal is going to be 4,420. Also, make sure you're subscribed and then make sure you have your notifications turned on so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a video. Long night! And also, if you're looking for a way to show a little bit more support to this channel, then consider checking out my Patreon link down below in the description, and it can be found online at patreon.com/SirHuntsReviews. Now the first potential way that this show could end would be on a bit of a positive note, but the way that we get to the very last few moments could be a hell of a journey, and most people are like, okay, this is the sweet part to the bittersweet ending. What I'm talking about here is the wedding of ice and fire. The series could end with Jon Snow and Daenerys getting married. Maybe they're able to sit the Iron Throne respectively together, and their union not only saved the world from another long night, but it also saved Westeros by uniting the North and the South. And just as a little bit of a side rant here, I saw a few people commenting the other day when I recently in season started reflecting on how I think, and everyone knows, that Lord of the Rings was a heavy inspiration for Game of Thrones and A Song of Ice and Fire. And in that video in particular, I mentioned how I think that Lord of the Rings ended this way and Game of Thrones could end potentially this way. And that person commented and said, no, you haven't been paying attention. Game of Thrones is not based on Lord of the Rings, it's actually based on the War of the Roses. Now here's the thing, that commenter wasn't exactly wrong, but they kind of were at the same time. George R. Martin has stated on multiple different occasions that he literally pulls from every single thing. He pulls from actual history, he pulls from fictional history, and he pulls from some of his favorite works of literature, i.e. Lord of the Rings. His philosophy on pulling from many different places is actually hilarious. He says if you pull from enough sources and twist it around enough times, it's not called plagiarism. Instead, everyone calls you creative. But just sort of getting back to the whole marriage of ice and fire, it's really interesting what they're doing this season. Like, I believe the main reason why they decided to go this route is because when Dan and Dave were initially given the task of turning Game of Thrones into a television series, which is an adaptation of A Song of Ice and Fire, the biggest secret that was revealed to them was Jon Snow's true lineage. So I think with them having surpassed the books in the events that are happening right now in the television series, they decided to make the end focus around Jon Snow's reveal. When in the actual novels, there's going to be several different key players, and just in general, a whole bunch of more stuff that's going on. George has the luxury to do that. He can put, 700 to 800 pages in a book. Dan and Dave only have a few episodes left, so they've decided to condense the story greatly, and in doing so, I believe they're trying to shift the main focus, the main hero of the story, all the way on to Jon Snow. Now for me, someone who's a massive Daenerys fan, but also a massive Jon Snow fan, this is pretty conflicting. When Jon finally revealed his lineage to Daenerys back in episode 2, they sort of left it on a cliffhanger to think there's going to be some sort of competition for the Iron Throne. I've long since said in my videos, and I still think, until I guess we see otherwise in the TV show, that Jon doesn't want the Iron Throne. He barely took the crown in the North, and now just because he found out that he's descended from some long line of sister fuckers, it doesn't make sense for him to just all of a sudden want the Iron Throne. Maybe if it's forced upon him, and if he doesn't think Daenerys is really fit to wear the crown because there would be an imbalance of power with her having dragons, there would be something come up. But then I really should just turn my brain off sometimes, because if we remember, back in episode 1, when Daenerys first arrived to Winterfell, we thought that the rest of episode 2 and, going even into episode 3, they're going to be bickering with each other. That was clearly snuffed out at nearly the beginning of episode 2. So I think this whole cliffhanger where Jon's like, sort of making it seem like he wants the Iron Throne, or not that he wants it, but it's his destiny so that he should actually wear the crown. But long story short, I think they're just trying to misdirect us. They want us to think that there's some potential rivalry coming up between Jon Snow, but ultimately there's something on the horizon, and that's death. And death in this story doesn't do anything but bring the characters closer together. And relating what I said back to the start of this, I do believe that there is a strong possibility that the bittersweet part, or the sweet part of the bittersweet ending to A Song of Ice and Fire into Game of Thrones, will be with Jon Snow and Daenerys' wedding. Maybe part of that whole bitter side is that they can't have any children, so there's a potential for them to be the last of their name. Daenerys has used an insane amount of blood magic, and Jon Snow has literally died and come back. Maybe part of their punishment for sort of giving life again. With Daenerys, it's more of a metaphysical way, and with Jon, it's actually him coming back to life. Maybe part of that cosmic karma that goes around in A Song of Ice and Fire means that they'll get to live, but they won't be able to have someone to carry on their name. Which, let's face it, that seems to be all everyone in this story cares about. Throw on your tinfoil caps here, but there's a possibility that, I know I'm reading too much into this, but in episode 1, Daenerys says we could stay here for 1,000 years. And we know that Jon Snow is technically a Fire White. We assume that is a possibility, anyway, that when the Night King is taken out, Jon Snow could drop with him. Maybe part of the magic that's keeping the Night King alive is infused in Jon Snow, and once that magic dies in the Night King, Jon Snow dies as well. There's also a possibility that Jon Snow can't die if he isn't, just split in half and not quickly prayed over. Maybe he physically can't die. Maybe in one of the up-and-coming episodes, Daenerys dies and is brought back, and then since she's brought back using R'hllor's magic, she can't die as well. Maybe the story ends with Jon Snow and Daenerys getting married and then sitting the Iron Throne for 1,000 years. I'm just gonna back away from that and move on to the next thing that I want to discuss. Well, actually, it's sort of kind of related to what we were just talking about. And this is actually a question that I was sent from one of my lovely patrons over at patreon.com/SirHunsReviews. And this comes from a user named Gaia Shadow. And she says, do you think they're going to even have a pregnancy for Dany? I don't see it happening unless they do a time jump. Do you think they will do a time jump in between any of the episodes? Great question. Thank you for that, Gaia Shadow. In my opinion, I think that there's a possibility for Daenerys to get pregnant this season. The biggest issue that we have to sort of deal with is what will happen once the Iron Throne is captured, the Army of the Dead is dealt with, and Cersei's either dead or in jail. With a story that's had this much death and suffering, then I've always felt like there will have to be some sort of balance to that, or they will have to keep to the same tradition to that in the end. If Jon and Daenerys have a child, then one of them, in my opinion, will likely die. Or maybe even both. Perhaps Daenerys, like many of the mothers during that time frame, could die during childbirth, and maybe Jon Snow dies once the Night King is killed, and his magic that's keeping him alive is no longer needed in the world of Westeros. And as far as Daenerys actually being pregnant right now, I feel like if that were a thing, they should have, just maybe place Jon Snow's hand on her stomach or just some sort of sign like that in the first or second episode. Now that we're coming to the third episode, I don't really know what's going to happen. And incorporating the last part of your question, if they do it this way, maybe Daenerys' pregnancy isn't brought up until the back end of the season, episode 4, 5, and 6, then maybe there is a time jump. Maybe there's an amount of time that Daenerys and Jon sort of take off from the war to rebuild their army before going to go take the Iron Throne from Cersei. And I was sent the leak, spoiler warning, but I was sent the leak that pretty much had both Jon Snow and Daenerys dying, and it's probably fake as shit, but in the end, there's like a fade to black type of thing. Then the screen cuts back on and we see Davos walking a child of Jon and Daenerys, their daughter actually, through Dragonstone, and he's teaching her how to read before the camera fades out again. Like I said, it was fake as hell and also corny, but maybe something similar to that could happen in the end. Now the next way that Game of Thrones could potentially end that I want to discuss in this video is something that I'm not going to spend as much time on because I've sort of talked it to death throughout this offseason. You could actually find a link to my most recent video that I did on it about Tyrion's betrayal down below in the description. But in short, it has become a massively popular fan theory that Tyrion will do something at some point in Game of Thrones Season 8 that will relate to what he did in Season 7. That conversation they had with Cersei that got cut short. We didn't know what was actually exchanged between them, but the theory states that Episode 6 of Game of Thrones Season 8, the final episode of Game of Thrones, will begin with Tyrion's trial. He's found guilty and he's burned by a dragon. Now, there's been a pretty decent amount of foreshadowing to that in not only Game of Thrones Season 7, but also more recently in Game of Thrones Season 8. Hell, at the start of the episode, about 4 minutes in, Tyrion literally says, "Hey guys, I'm pretty sure that by the end of this, one of y'all will be wearing the pin." Now, the camera doesn't exactly focus on Jorah or Varys, but it's sort of hinted at the fact that Tyrion won't be Daenerys' hand of the queen by the end. Now, you see, here's my problem with this whole thing, and the main reason why I don't think it's gonna go down quite how we expect it to in Episode 6 is that the freaking guys who do special effects for the television show, when they were accepting an Emmy or an Oscar, I can't remember which one, but they literally said Tyrion's death in a joke and just pretended to spoil that Tyrion was gonna die in Game of Thrones Season 8. We've also had the actual character's history to maybe think that maybe he'll do something to go back and join his family's side. But one thing we have to realize is the showrunners and everyone involved in this show, the actors included, love fucking with us, love keeping us on our toes and making it so that we don't really know what to expect next. If we all think that the the season ends with Tyrion's betrayal and then he's sort of put on trial and what actually happens is completely different, then it will make it all that much better. And one more thing that I want to mention about this whole theory about how Game of Thrones Season 8 will end with Tyrion's trial before I move on to the next thing is that we were all told Tyrion was in love with Daenerys. The look that he gives to Jon Snow and Daenerys when they close the door, when he walks out of the shadows at the end of Season 7, we all thought that was going to be a major plot point. Well, guess what? We're nearly 3 episodes in and nothing has come of it. Tyrion has not one time tried to downplay Jon Snow's importance. As a matter of fact, he was looking at them sort of lovingly, like he's like almost a parental figure. When he's with Varys and Davos on the battlements of Winterfell looking at Jon Snow embrace each other, he's actually happy for both of them. Took me a while to realize it because I thought, Tyrion was in love with Daenerys. It's kind of hard to not be in love with Emilia Clarke, but I thought that would be a major plot point this season, and now I'm realizing it literally is making this video. That was a load of horseshit. Nothing's gonna come of that unless they do something that will come out of left field in the last 3 episodes of the season. Tyrion is completely content with Jon Snow and Daenerys. This is another reason why I think he won't do something to betray them. Maybe his actions of the past, and this has been my long running theory of this, maybe something that he did, like trust Cersei as a mistake, will backfire on him, and then she'll reveal some type of information which will be ultimately interpreted by Jon Snow and Daenerys as a betrayal, and maybe he's forced to go to the wall or have a trial by combat. And the last potential way that I think Game of Thrones Season 8 could end that I want to discuss in this video anyway is that with Cersei, the ultimate villain, dying. I am a huge fan of Lena Headey, and for a while, and I still kind of do, think that it would be sort of an awesome ending if she was somehow still able to retain the Iron Throne of the Crown. But now that I see how serious and how high the stakes are in this series, I don't really, this season, I don't really think there's a chance that that's going to happen. She's either going to be on top, which would ultimately mean that Jon Snow and Daenerys have been dealt with and are likely dead, or she's going to be killed herself. The way that she runs her camp, which is pretty much all or nothing, either she gets everything she wants and the power she craves, or she dies in the process. I think that's the biggest sort of foreshadowing into how we know her ending is going to turn out. There's been a few different interviews with George R. R. Martin and then also with the actress who plays Cersei, Lena Headey. There's been some foreshadowing that Cersei could potentially be the last person to sit the Iron Throne. Not necessarily the last person who's wearing the Iron Crown at the end of the series, but just in general, the last person who sits the Iron Throne. Meaning after Cersei is destroyed, so is the Iron Throne itself. And one of the biggest things that sort of foreshadows that is the upcoming, contention between Jon Snow and Daenerys about who's the rightful heir. Jon doesn't really want the Iron Throne, and it's all Daenerys has ever wanted. If there's going to cause conflict in between the two of them, which I'm sure by the end of it, they're just going to be so done with anything that involves stress, they'll likely want to be rid of it. Just imagine how badass it would be if Jon Snow and Daenerys on the back of Rhaegal and Drogon come crashing through the Red Keep and melt Cersei and the Iron Throne all together at once. Daenerys could deliver some kind of line like, "You wanted the throne, bitch, keep it," and then Dracarys. And I know I've said this before a few videos ago, in fact, but the first Dracarys from Jon Snow is coming up in a few days. It's going to be magnificent. Now for this next part, I'll quickly throw up another spoiler warning. If you've been watching any of my videos throughout the off-season, you know that I have heavily referenced, but there were several images of Cersei and Jon Snow pretty much standing right next to each other in what appears to be a window. There was a lot of speculation that most people think that this could be fake. They probably did this just so that we would think there's some point in Game of Thrones Season 8 where Cersei and Jon Snow finally meet up, but here's the thing. There was major amounts of camera equipment, and the amount of time they spent filming at this location is equal to how much or how long it takes to film an actual scene for the television series. When you take into consideration that Lena Headey said her last day of filming involved her walking up and down several mounts of stairs, and then you look at the opening credits of King's Landing and you see this massive spiral staircase, there's a strong possibility that that scene wasn't exactly fake. Maybe Jon Snow, who, they placed the importance on this season, has finally become king, has been crowned, and is walking up to offer Cersei surrenderance. Maybe he wants to guarantee her that he's going to allow her to walk out of King's Landing if she lays down her crown. Jon is likely going to be the type of king who will avoid unnecessary bloodshed. But just relating back to Lena said about how her last day of filming was running up and down stairs, it could possibly be, and this just sort of came to me out of the blue, that maybe she dies in that scene, and that's why they have to film it over and over again, because it's her actual death scene. The only thing that I could think of is maybe Arya's chasing her through the halls of the Red Keep, and all of a sudden she gets to this massive staircase and then tumbles down the staircase in some brutally gruesome way that everyone who who hates Cersei, every single person who watches the show enjoys so much, because it's just such a crazy sight that she just, I mean, I don't know, I don't want to really describe it, but it would be pretty gruesome. And before I get a few hundred comments of people saying, well, you know, they don't film in order, so technically whatever the actor filmed on their last day doesn't necessarily mean it was their last scene, I'm aware of that. I just want to speculate on different ways that could have involved Lena Headey filming some sort of scene where she's walking up and down the stairs. We are getting super tight for time in this video, but I just want to end it by answering one more question from another one of my awesome Patreons named Terry. And he mentions that, what's your thoughts on the Night King setting the stage for the Battle of Winterfell, then moving part of his army southward towards King's Landing? To that I say, it's entirely possible. I sort of mentioned it in my last video, but there's a strong possibility that the Night King is setting everybody up. Just like how he did north of the wall by allowing Jon Snow to survive until Daenerys brought him a dragon. Maybe he looked through the eyes of Bran, saw that the master plan of the people who are at Winterfell, including their massive army, was going to destroy his current army of the dead. Maybe they've been so long up north and I'm thinking too much about it, but maybe he knew that his army was going to get destroyed at Winterfell and he immediately flew to King's Landing to go and recuperate that army. You all let me know what you think about that down below in the comment section. Thanks again, Terry, for submitting your question. Alright, and with that being said, I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you could please slap a like on this video, as the like goal is going to be 4,420. Also, make sure you're subscribed, and then, this is the most important part, make sure your notifications turned on, so that way you get alerted every single time I drop a video. Long night. Super special shout out to every single person watching this video, and a super special thank you to every single member of my Patreon family over on patreon.com/SirHuntsReviews. I want to thank you all again so much for watching. My name's Mark, and this has been Sir Hunts Reviews. This is a little after the credits shout out. If y'all want a little bit of comedy in your life in between episodes of Game of Thrones, go check out Tiger Belly, Your Mom's House, and Whiskey Ginger. All three of those podcasts are fucking hilarious, and I enjoy listening to them. I'm watching episodes on repeat right now while editing this video. Whole man out.